I cried when the sun rose. It's beautiful, isn't it, your sun? This gargantuan orb of blazing fury that dominates the clear skies. Its sheer intensity and raw power is one that is matched only by its cosmic beauty. As well as this, its ability to marvel is matched by its ability to terrify. For indeed, I am moved to tears of dread when the day breaks. I must admit, I've been curious as to why so many of you I see associate the cloudy days of the darkness with evil or despair. At the same time, though, I understand. For you would not have seen true despair, true horror as I have. You have not yet seen the whims of an unstoppable forest strip everything you knew away from you before your very eyes. Not as you are now, at least. Indeed, this is a different breed of beings than what I remember. A different age. But you are still beings of flesh all the same. None of you will remember that day. The day when the skies went dark and all would look to the sky not in wonder but in fear. The day when our native lands would be consumed, forever ceasing to exist. More than this, you won't remember how we tried to warn you, how we foretold the end, how we only wanted to help you all, and how you slaughtered us for it. You won't remember, because you would never be allowed to remember. It doesn't allow you to remember. It, the last child and creator of the flesh, created you all to be different from what you were before. I must admit, this always made me curious. Why would it continuously recreate a different world than what it once knew? Perhaps I've thought, it's trying to camouflage this new world, as if doing so might allow it to hide from the inevitable. I understand that much of this will be difficult for you to comprehend. As I've said, it keeps you all in blissful ignorance. It wants you to live without knowing the horrors that came before. It also sees me and my kind as evil. It always seen us as responsible for the devastation of our native lands before, the long since existent worlds of a bygone era. It is for this reason that I fear much of what I say now will fall upon deaf ears. You won't remember as it does that it was we who made this world possible to exist. It was we who ferried it across the cosmos and brought it here to rebuild and thrive anew. You won't know yet of the terror I know it feels even now, the terror that we both feel even now. You may be wondering exactly who I am and why I tell you this. To answer your first question, I am referred to as many different things to many of you. Each of you seems to have a unique perception of what me and my kind are. In some ways, I am what some of you have taken to call an angel. To others, I am what is collectively known as a demon. And to the more primitive, I am simply an alien descent from beyond. I suppose this would be the most accurate way to describe what I am. A foreigner from the dark beyond. I, however, consider myself, as I did back then on Andromeda, to be a messenger, a Sibyl as you might know it, come so that you may all remember as I do, as it does, the lost ages of Andromeda. Much like here with this galaxy, Andromeda also bore bright, burning suns that cast all through the cosmos. There were 3 of them, each rotating in eternal cycle. Because of this, night did not exist on any of the Andromedan worlds. The skies were always beautifully illuminated with the different spectral, auroral rays corresponding to each sun. That was always the crown of Andromeda's beauty. That too has perplexed me, how such beauty would spawn from such a force as it, as the starving one, as chaos, the beginning and end whose 8 limbs silently scream with the pain of eternal hunger. But such as it was, we would all be spawned from it. My kind were torn directly from its cloth as its descendants, unlike you and all others whom were developed more uniquely. My native world rested in the very center of Andromeda's core, always warmed by these sun's ultraviolet rays. This world we knew by the name of Null, Void, for it is our home, the home of those that descend from the beginning and the end itself. And on Null, We thrived among our own as a community, much as you did then and do now. Like I watch you all do, we too built mighty structures for shelter, for community, and for worship. Though, aware of notice that you, all of this era, this breed, seem to worship any being or force that you would deem as unnatural or unknown. We had one, and one alone who we knelt to. One whom we feared, and it was all too known to us, the gluttonous star itself, Chaos. It was he who first brought forth the cosmos. It was he who first penetrated the eternal dark with the birth of light. It was he who produced the vast, innumerable worlds and the creatures that walk upon them. And it was he that would be the end of all of this. I suppose in these and in a few other ways, myself and my kind perhaps aren't so alien to you after all. All who inhabited Andromeda's worlds acted in this manner, all bowing only to the gluttonous star. Such would prove the same with our folly as well. For as I've watched how you all would, in various ways attempt to placate or appease those to which you kneel to, we too thought we could prolong inevitability in this manner. To each world of Andromeda was always some center of worship to the star, some effigy, whether cruelly or adeptly, carven or erected in its image. On Null, it was a mere carving upon the ground at the planet's center, a cavernous pit in its center to represent the great maw as its core from which creation was born from. I remember how for almost an endless millennia, at the dawning of each sun's apex when a different sun would poise itself directly overhead, the nulling ceremony was observed. We would all gather around the carving, standing about its outline, and we would shriek uniformly to the cosmos with each of our 5 mouths. One was always selected to cast themselves into the pit as an offering, as our means of giving back that which the star lost in our creation. What we wouldn't understand until it was far too late was that our God was not one that could be served, only feared. It would have us all in the end, regardless of devotion or sacrifice, for the gluttonous star, Chaos, is inevitability itself, the supreme force of nature through the cosmos, and all are but mere nourishment, existing only as such as it robes the vast outer dark. It was when the second sun had reached its apex that day, the day in which we realized the horrific truth, that we had gathered for our second nulling ritual. I remember how beautiful the sun's scarlet aura was, beaming overcast across Null's sandy, colorless terrain. That had always been the most beautiful in my eyes of the 3 Andromedan suns. It would be in terror and sorrow that I would watch a shadow eclipse this beauty. There it stood, Chaos looming above us all, silhouetted against the sun, forever shrouding the land for the first and last time in complete shadow. I still hear their shrieks of horror when everything spanning the millennia that was constructed by our kind began crumbling. The first thing I felt was the terrain shake violently when I looked up to the beautiful scarlet bleached sky and beheld our Maker for the first time. I remember the violet glow of its maw as the planet's terrain was then uprooted, taken into and greedily consumed by it, taking it forever into oblivion. While doing this, I saw how its 8 starving arms writhed frantically, as if in excitement to relieve, each of its mouths opening wider with soundless agony and desperation. More than this, I can never forget how our collective shrieks, pervasive and dominating as they were, fell upon no ears when we began to be quickly taken into the abysmal maw. When I see the sunrise, I still see each of their faces when they reached and screamed out to me for salvation, before they were ripped into the sky and into the maw, ceasing to exist. That was the day when all of Andromeda would know that salvation and prosperity was only a false hope. Once the star would have Null, I and the small handful who had found a way to flee oblivion dispersed to whatever world we thought might be able to serve as a new haven for refuge. What safety we thought this would buy us I cannot say, save perhaps mere idiot naivety. But then not many worlds would be left, however, for the gluttonous star was not patient with its ravenous ire. I watched as, with every passing second, more of Andromeda's worlds were helplessly pulled into the maw, devoured just as Null was. With this, we realized Andromeda was lost and changed our objective. With each world we could set upon, instead of seeking refuge, we would always use the knowledge of our oncoming doom to warn the native inhabitants to flee. We felt that if we could not save Andromeda, then we could at least preserve its legacy in a new galaxy. Many believed us and trusted our judgments and took to the stars as we had, though the number of which actually managed to escape the end I cannot say, for we had seen far too many still be helplessly taken by the star. I suppose that if there are any out there among the vast cosmos that did survive that horrid day, those hours of reckoning with everything we thought we knew of both existence and of its meaning, that they too, as it does now, have sought abandoned or untenanted moons to hide upon. I must admit this as a thought that has caused me to look to the sky at night and wonder, are there any still out there? Any of the numerous, beautiful natives of Andromeda that still live? Well, I know that there is one who does. I know because, as I've said, we were the ones who made sure this one did not perish entirely, though not without facing another horror ourselves, the horror of genocide. With most of the other worlds either abandoned or consumed by the gluttonous star, we quickly set upon the last world we knew to still contain life. Your original home, Jamaz, the world of the flesh. It was what you would all name as a grotesque hellscape, with its terrain of living primordial flesh. Grotesque as it may have been, it was your home, and I remember beholding the creatures of flesh for the first time. The ways in which I watched them conduct themselves, as well as their unique attributes as a whole, were what your breed of fleshings would see as primal, and would be horrified at. I must admit that I was not horrified, given that I had by then long since been benumbed by the common depictions of terror or dread. I was curious at the nature of these creatures. I suppose calling them primal isn't altogether an incorrect depiction of them. Indeed, all of the beings of Andromeda's worlds is what your kind that was the most unique. From the manners in which they all mindlessly shambled upon their native soil, grazing and milling blindly about and occasionally even consuming yourselves for nourishment, to the way in which I had watched each creature mold to life from the terrain itself. These beings were in every sense the most unique and strange. More than this, I saw that these beings, unlike the other worlds, didn't bear any knowledge of architecture or community. There were none of the monolithic monuments or spires such as what we had on Null, none of the aquatic domes that defied gravity such like what was on Hydrock, not even the spectral pylons of life from Elec or the fungal growth huts such as what was on Botan. Even the ways in which the fleshlings communicated was unique from any other, having a form of articulate speech as opposed to the screeches or howls that other creatures of Andromeda used. They didn't seem to congregate or live as a community, instead just living blindly, minding only themselves. Simply put, you were the most primitive creatures in all of Andromeda, and yet you were the most free. Perhaps that was what intrigued me about you the most. In all respects, these creatures were the most underdeveloped compared to the rest, but at the same time, you were all the most peaceful in your own way. You knew nothing yet of reverence or fear, for I observed that you didn't, as the rest of us had, bow to any sort of image of the gluttonous star. Simply put, your kind bore a sense of tranquility or serenity, a peace that no other before could know. Maybe in a certain sense, my kind really are guilty then. We would introduce the concept of terror to you for the first time with our warnings of what was coming. In doing this, we stripped you of this freedom, and for that, I will ask that we be someday forgiven, if not by it, then by you all now. We told many of them, urging them to flee by showing them visions of the coming doom. They, however, seemed to take this as an act of hostility, adamantly believing us to be some sort of beacon to the star that was hailing it. They believed we were leading the end to them, rather than trying to save them. It was this misguided fear that drove them to violence. No matter our pleas for innocence or mercy, their wrath was unbound. I would again hear these screeches of these suffering of my kind as they fell, soaking the flesh soil in their blood. Everywhere, spanning Derma's beautifully scarlet-bleached horizon, I saw nothing short of utter carnage unfold. Some I saw were ripped limb from limb, slowly and painfully torn apart, while the others were impaled through their cores with the creature's long, curved talons. We were outnumbered, weakened, and hopelessly outmatched against them, and it wasn't long before the already small number of us had dwindled to only a handful. I myself almost succumbed to this gruesome fate when, in an attempt to flee for whatever refuge I could find, one of them had caught me and cast me upon the flesh soil like I was waste and was viciously tearing me open. Just when I was about to resign myself to my fate, however, I noticed the casting of an all too familiar shadow, followed by a violet glow. That was when true terror flooded through me again, as the flesh soil shook and quaked just as with Null. When I looked at the sky this time, it was to see my attacker be forced into the maw above, though I couldn't see it on his face as I had my kin on Null, for these creatures bore no face. The frenzied flailing of his gangly arms that reached out to grab onto anything that would save it from inevitability said it all. It was afraid, and it realized that we only wanted to help. It was all too soon that the sky was filled with them, thousands of fleshlings frantically flailing while being forced into the sky to be digested by the void with the rest of Andromeda. I would have resigned myself to the same fate, having now seen devastation for a second time, and feeling every bit of the weight of this failure, if I had not seen it, the birth of a new flesh child. It was something that might have been overlooked in any other circumstance, but all the same, I saw it for what it was. A last effort, a last chance for a redemption. Weak and battered, I struggled to make my way over to the birthing creature. The few that remained urged me to flee with them, to save ourselves and to abandon the planet to its fate. I, however, remained adamant and steadfast in my goal, to preserve at least a fragment of our lost age. Using what minute strength that I still possessed, I, with the aid of the others, began to ferry this newborn flesh child away from the dying world and into the outer dark. Nearing the edge of Andromeda's borders, I looked back to see those 3 beautiful suns being slowly devoured. That, I think, was the very first time that I cried. In only mere hours, I had just witnessed the desolation of an entire millennia, the end of life and beauty of existence itself. Yet here I was, now carrying one last seed to bear a new generation. I know not how long we roved the cosmos for, nor could I have told you how we came upon this galaxy. In truth, my primary objective was simply to find refuge somewhere as far away from Andromeda as possible. Somewhere where perhaps the gluttonous star wouldn't soon follow. I suppose, though, deep down, I always knew and feared that it would one day find us. In spite of this, I thought that we would at least buy this new generation of civilizations a better chance of survival by starting anew in a galaxy hidden as far deep into the vast cosmic void as we could find. Eventually, we finally found such a galaxy. It was empty, untenanted, and uncorrupted by any creature or force before. A virgin galaxy. In its center was the large, beautiful sun that sets even as I record this. Around it were 7 worlds, 3 of which bore large rings of vapor and rock. We reasoned this was our safest haven to start anew, for it was far from the reaches of Andromeda, and thus would be perhaps hidden from the range of the gluttonous star for the time at least. We ventured into it until finally our strength waned and we released it, this last flesh child, adrift into the cosmos. We began to ebb away, dissolving from our physical bodies into a cluster of spectral vapors. Before this was able to fully take effect, we were able to join together and form an entirely new cosmic body, unifying as the Ghast, the moon that lives. From this new form we watched as the fleshling awoke from its catatonia and began to from its own flesh, form a brand new world where none had existed before from its own image. Though this would not be entirely the same world that I knew before. I watched as it would birth creatures similar to, though not entirely representative of, the other civilizations of Andromeda. That I think of it now, perhaps that may yet be why its act of creation differed from that of Dermas. What was more astounding to me was when I saw the fleshling then begin to somehow use the primordial flesh to mold a new landscape of lush green soil, similar to the green fungal world of Bhutan. As well as this, I saw that it was combining it with the crystalline blue water I had remembered seeing at Hydrock. This made me and others curious as well as astonished. How was it able to create such things that it could never have known? Perhaps through some latent memory or instinct, it too sought to preserve a fragment of the lost age from where it first came. The first of these creatures I remember were those gargantuan beasts your breed later deemed as dinosaurs. Large, mindless beasts that reminded me much of the scaly dwellers of the dark and cavernous world of Raptar. Unlike they, however, their mannerisms were much less sophisticated, behaving much more to its own native behaviors of mindless, primal actions. For a time, this was how the New World lived, as a fragmented amalgamation, a shell of lost worlds. Over time, I saw how more and more new creatures would be introduced from the primordial flesh. Most of them were strange new variants of the more bestial natives of the former planet Dermas, these newborns being formed with proper skin, unlike their former nakedness on Dermas. Of course, the pinnacle of these newborn variations of fleshlings were your kind, human beings themselves. I remember how shocked myself and the others of the aghast were upon beholding this brand new marvel. For these creatures, though reminiscent of their Andromedan creator, with its shape and feature, were still something else entirely. They were an extension and evolution and maturity of the primitive Dermas natives. Above this, these new creatures possessed a capacity for higher thought, for reasoning. It wasn't long before I even watched them construct their own dwellings, something they never could have donned to do before. More than just this, however, I watched you even begin constructing images of worship, just as we had on Andromeda. That's when I would realize for the first time what this new civilization, this new world was. Our efforts had not been in vain, for your kind were the living single embodiment of Andromeda, the combined tapestry of every aspect of peoples long non-existent. I watched as you all gathered just as we had, performing your own various ceremonies, each of them different in their own ways according to their various tribes. And still, you all remained as a blind people, for even in your practices, your devotion and fascination with beings above yourselves, you still never acknowledged the one most powerful of all. Thousands of theologies across eras of civilizations, and not one was ever in worship of the gluttonous star. Because of this, you remained a peaceful people, just as you were on Dermas. For eons, we would simply observe you from afar. We, the Ghast, have watched you evolve from the very beginning, and we coexisted in this manner harmoniously. But as with all harmony, as was realized back on Andromeda, such must come to its bitter end. And it is for this reason, as with every other occasion before, that I beseech you now. I know not how long it was when we felt it, because we natives of Null were direct descendants of the star, cut directly from its cloth. We feel its presence when it draws near. We did aeons before when it took Null, and we do now as it continues to draw near. It is for this reason that we've come upon you when we have, because our new cosmic bond would not allow us in individual form to walk upon you with as we had on Dermas. We've always resorted to calling from afar to those that would listen, beckoning them to spread our warning. On certain occasions, such as I do now, we would assume control of one of you to communicate directly. In both instances, the result becomes the same. The fleshling, your creator, always seeks to destroy us as his people did eons before, by forcing you to turn your aggression upon each other as a means of indirectly attacking us. For in his eyes, we have and always will be the menacers, the harbingers of oblivion. We will never know our efforts in saving him, nor will he allow you to be influenced in any fashion by mine or any prophecies uttered by my kind. This is why I now cry, for I believe that the end is soon upon us, and this time there will be no way that I or any other can save you. I leave this world now with this boon. Look not to the sun for beauty, look not to the sky for hope, for all that will come from the sky is the terror at the end of all things. I can feel it now, the gluttonous star, drawing ever closer through the vast outer dark. It's starving as it's always starved. I can feel its hunger as clearly as I feel the sun's warmth through this vessel of flesh. The sun, how beautiful and yet so haunting. I will always cry at the sun's rise.